Good morning. For months, the Liberals have faced questions about the role that their partisan donor database plays in judicial appointments. Canadians deserve to know that their judges are the best qualified to take the bench, not just the best qualified Liberal donor to take the bench. Depuis des mois, les libéraux sont font poser des questions sur le rôle de leurs donateurs et partisans dans les nominations judiciaires. Les Canadiens méritent de savoir que leurs juges sont les plus qualifiés pour siéger, qu'ils ne sont pas uniquement les donateurs libéraux les plus qualifiés. The Canadian Bar Association, law professors, and even former aides to the Justice Minister have raised concerns about the veto that Liberal list has been rumored to have on judicial appointments. The very fact that they run their appointments through something called Liberal list shows that there is one list for friends of the Liberal Party and another list for regular Canadians. This is another example of the entitlement culture created by Justin Trudeau. Last week, senior government sources claimed that Liberal list would no longer be used, but that's only after almost 6 years of appointments being determined by donor history and partisan activity. Only a few weeks ago, the Justice Minister had to take down a tweet congratulating one of his longtime friends and donors on being appointed to the bench, after it was revealed that the donor hadn't completed the appointment process. Process didn't matter because he was on the right list. Il y a quelques semaines, le ministre de la Justice a dû réitérer un tweet dans lequel il félicitait l'un de ses principaux donateurs. Ce même donateur a été nommé juge. Le tweet fut réitéré après qu'on a appris que le donateur en question n'avait pas suivi le processus de nomination. Previously, when the Minister of Justice was first asked about officials at the Liberal Party vetting judges, he denied this fact and said it wasn't true. But now we know the truth. Canada's Conservatives have serious questions about the unethical and often corrupt nature of appointments under Mr. Trudeau, and he must answer for it. Canadians deserve to know how long Liberal list had been used to have a veto on judicial appointments. Les conservateurs se posent des sérieuses questions sur la nature non éthique et corrompue de ces nominations. Justin Trudeau doit rendre des comptes. Les Canadiens doivent savoir depuis combien de temps les libéraux ont disposé d'un droit de veto sur les nominations judiciaires. Canadians deserve to know how many appointments were subject to the approval of the Liberals' partisan supporter database. And they deserve to know if the Liberals only promised to stop using Liberal list after they had compiled a short list for the Supreme Court vacancy this summer. Canada cannot afford to have further scandals and more of the same corruption from Mr. Trudeau and the Liberals. Why did the Justice Minister mislead Canadians? And what was he trying to cover up for the Prime Minister? More scandals, more corruption, more cover-ups. This is what Canadians can expect from Mr. Trudeau and the Liberals. There's really only one choice to end their corruption and secure accountability in Ottawa: Canada's Conservatives. Encore des scandales, encore de la corruption, encore du camouflage. C'est toujours la même histoire avec Justin Trudeau et les libéraux. Pour mettre fin à la corruption et assurer la responsabilité à Ottawa, il n'y a qu'un seul choix: le Parti conservateur. Merci beaucoup, and I'm happy to take your questions.
And now we'll be taking questions, starting with question on the phone, and alternate between the room and the phone to sanitize the mic between questions. Quick reminder, as usual, one question and one follow-up. Nous allons maintenant prendre les questions, commençant par les questions au téléphone et alternant les questions de la salle et au téléphone pour bien désinfecter le micro entre les questions. Petit rappel, une question avec une question de suivi. Today, Mr. O'Toole will take 8 questions. Aujourd'hui, M. O'Toole prendra 8 questions. Operator, do we have the first question?
From Ryan Tumulty at National Post.
Yeah, good morning, Mr. O'Toole. Thanks for taking our questions. Last week, the Alberta opposition leader, Rachel Notley, sent you a letter about the proposed equalization referendum in the fall. She wanted to understand what your position would be. I guess I'm asking the same question, which is, should Alberta voters ask for equalization to be removed from the Constitution in this referendum this fall? Is that something, as Prime Minister, you'd be willing to consider?
Thank you, Ryan. I'll be responding to Ms. Notley today. I was quite surprised, actually, to see a letter from the opposition leader in Alberta about an issue before the Legislative Assembly of Alberta, her asking for comment from Ottawa. I have full confidence that Albertans and their legislature can make decisions and hold referendums on issues that are important to Albertans. I think the frustrations in Alberta are due to Ottawa, due to Mr. Trudeau and his paternalistic view towards the provinces. I think the last thing they need is interference in their own affairs, and we will not be interfering. We will respect provincial jurisdiction.
Follow-up?
Yeah, I understand that perspective, Mr. O'Toole, but I'm wondering, Mr. Trudeau, I think, is very unlikely to be willing to remove the concept of equalization from Canada's Constitution. You're the person most likely to be Prime Minister this fall, certainly between you and Mr. Trudeau, I think. Shouldn't Albertans know in advance of voting in this equalization in voting in this referendum, if the federal government is even willing to consider the changes that they're asking for?
Albertans should know that I will try and heal the national unity divisions that have been caused by Mr. Trudeau. The first conversation I had, hours after winning the leadership and becoming opposition leader, I raised Western alienation with Prime Minister Trudeau. The division we feel, the frustration we feel, is due to the Trudeau Liberals' ideological approach, and I will try and address that with issues like the provisions in Bill C-69. We will revisit those in the first 100 days. I will try and partner with the provinces, not be a paternalistic Ottawa knows best. We had no national unity problems when the Conservatives were in. National unity, getting our country back to work, an ethical government that Canadians can trust again, these will all be priorities for me as Prime Minister.
We will take the next question from the floor. Nous allons prendre la prochaine question de la salle.
Good morning, Mr. O'Toole. David Thurton, CBC News.
Morning, David.
Good morning. Good to see you, man. I just wanted to ask you to maybe reflect about the events of the last couple of weeks and the discussions that we've been having about the attack in London. You're part of a party that has called or has proposed measures such as banning the niqab and a line to report, phone line to report barbaric cultural practices. So just in reflecting about the events of the last couple of the measures that your party has proposed, would you do anything differently? Do you think your party should have done anything differently in light of the events of the last couple of days?
Thank you, David. The last few weeks have been difficult weeks for our country. The event in London, the first event I was able to travel to in months, was heartbreaking. And I think all parties, including mine, including myself, have to be part of addressing concerns of the Muslim community, addressing the rise of Islamophobia, addressing what I've called the pandemic of darkness amidst the COVID pandemic, which is a rise of intolerance and hate. I pledged my support in all efforts to do that. We're calling on the Prime Minister to act on the requests of the community to host a summit on Islamophobia, and you will find the Conservatives are there to support Canadians, particularly in the Muslim community, grieving after that horrific attack.
What perhaps would you say to the Muslim community who maybe who maybe don't trust the Conservative Party to move forward in a positive way on this, given the history with the measures that your party have proposed, the way your party has voted on the Islamophobia motion that was before the Parliament at one point in time? We've seen some of your MPs, such as Michelle Rempel-Garner, Tim Uppal, who have expressed regrets about the way that the party has acted in the past. Do you feel it's time for the Conservatives to issue an apology to the Muslim community?
I think all parties need to do better, David, and that is what I've committed to as leader of the Conservative Party. And I'm proud that my members are reaching out to members of the Muslim community, reaching out, trying to build trust with Canadians. And from my first speech, I said, whatever your background culturally, the color of your skin, your religion, your orientation, you're welcome in the Conservative Party if you want to rebuild a country, get our economy moving, reduce the ethical scandals in Ottawa. And I've been reaching out to the Muslim community, and I'm proud we have some candidates from the community standing with us. We have to build trust with more and more Canadians before the next election, and I'm committed to do that.
Opérateur, prochaine question. Operator, next question.
Hélène Bouzzetti, les coops de l'information.
Oui, bonjour, Monsieur O'Toole. Écoutez, j'aimerais revenir à C10. J'aimerais savoir qu'avez-vous pensé des propos de votre député Rachel Arder, selon qui les artistes sont dépassés et ils revendiquent des subventions parce que c'est la seule façon pour eux de vivre de leur art?
Je suis fier de nos créateurs de contenu canadiens, québécois. Je suis fier de nos artistes et c'est la même chose pour notre parti. Comme vous le savez, Hélène, on a des questions, des inquiétudes en ce qui concerne la liberté d'expression et seulement ça, c'est possible d'équilibrer le terrain avec les géants du web américains sans une diminution des droits des Canadiens. Et ça serait notre approche.
Mais vous ne m'avez pas vraiment dit ce que vous pensez de Mme Arder et j'aimerais surtout savoir pourquoi elle ne s'est excusée qu'en français. Si elle s'était excusée en anglais, peut-être qu'elle aurait pu faire savoir aux lecteurs du Lethbridge Herald qu'elle retirait ses propos.
Il y a beaucoup de passion sur le sujet parce que la liberté d'expression, c'est un droit fondamental pour notre société. Et Rachel et Alain Reyes et tous nos députés ont posé des questions sur les changements dans la loi C10 sur ça. Mais nous appuyons nos artistes, les créateurs de contenu canadiens. C'est possible d'équilibrer le terrain, comme j'ai dit, sans une attaque sur la liberté d'expression. Comme un gouvernement, on va trouver un équilibre sur ça pour nos créateurs de contenu sans une attaque sur nos libertés.
We will take the next question from the floor. Nous allons prendre la prochaine question de la salle.
Mr. O'Toole, Mike Lecouture with Global National. I wanted to ask you this question not only as the leader of the opposition, but as a former member of the Canadian military. Do you believe that it was appropriate for the head of the Navy and the Vice Chief of the Defense Staff to go golfing with former CDS General Jonathan Vance while he remains under a military police investigation? And do you believe that what we've seen from these leaders and other leaders, that the Canadian military believes they're basically untouchable?
It was completely inappropriate. And it shows that there is a broken culture at the senior ranks in the Department of National Defense, that they did not have the personal judgment to make a better decision. There is no leadership from Minister Sajjan. Not a single person I know that served in the military or is there now has respect for the minister when he was in part of a cover-up of sexual harassment allegations for 3 years. And so without leadership at the top, an important institution is withering before our eyes. And as a veteran, I'm very concerned by that. Months ago, I called for a freeze on all promotions and salary increases for general and flag officers to send a signal that the old ways of operation are not acceptable. Mr. Trudeau's office, his entire government has been a part of a cover-up that is sullying the reputation of our military, Canadians' trust in it. I will seek to restore that trust, much like I will restore the trust in the judicial nomination process. We've seen, just in the last few days, Liberal interference in provincial elections by paid staff members. We've seen Liberal list using to put the interests of Liberals first. We've seen the We Charity scandal, that Mr. Trudeau was willing to shut down Parliament rather than expose the corruption of this government. There's a rot at the core of the Trudeau government, and I think Canadians deserve better.
I take your point as a follow-up. I take your point on your issues with the Liberal government. But is there more of a rot within the military? And I guess what I'm wondering is, are you concerned that the military's pledges to address sexual misconduct are basically now tarnished? And also, how do how do you deal with the apology that the head of the Navy issued, but at the same time saying that he apologizes for a public display of support with regards to General Vance? And I guess victims are probably wondering, where's their public display of support?
I know, having served in the military for 12 years, I'm proud of that service. I know the military reports to the civilian government. That's how a democracy works. There is zero leadership from Justin Trudeau and Minister Sajjan. That is setting a tone of no accountability. So the very fact that after months of allegations and questions about the conduct of some of our most senior generals, two last chiefs of defense staff, the thought that senior leaders would think that this conduct was appropriate shows that the serious erosion of trust that Canadians have for our Canadian Armed Forces has to be reversed. That comes politically, and that's something I think Canadians will see. A Conservative government will try and restore that trust in the forces, send a real signal of a zero tolerance for allegations of sexual misconduct or harassment. We need to make sure that Canadians, especially women, feel free to join their military and do so with respect and free from a culture of harassment. And the highest levels, including the political levels, need to send that clear message.
Operator, next question. Opérateur, prochaine question.
Catherine Lévesque, Canadian Press.
Oui, bonjour, M. O'Toole. J'aimerais revenir sur C10, mais pour vous demander si c'est votre compréhension que les sénateurs conservateurs, une fois que si C10 est adopté à la Chambre des communes et va au Sénat dans les prochains jours, est-ce que c'est votre compréhension que les sénateurs conservateurs vont également s'opposer à ce projet de loi?
C'est une question pour les sénateurs. Comme vous le savez, on a des inquiétudes avec le projet de loi sur la liberté d'expression et on va voir le débat dans le Sénat après la Chambre des communes. Mais comme d'habitude, le gouvernement de M. Trudeau est lent avec tous les projets de loi, incluant C10. Maintenant, il y a seulement quelques jours avant la pause et c'est à cause de la prorogation, à cause des délais au comité par le gouvernement de M. Trudeau. Et on va voir quels projets de loi vont passer la Chambre et le Sénat.
Donc, j'imagine ma question, c'est est-ce que vous aimeriez que les sénateurs poussent pour rétablir l'article 4.1, justement, que vous souhaitiez voir? Et j'avais une autre question. Ma question de suivi, en fait, c'était par rapport à cette motion d'opposition du Bloc québécois. Ce sera déposé demain. Dans le fond, le Bloc va tenter de savoir si tous les députés à Ottawa pensent que le Québec peut modifier la Constitution de façon unilatérale. Je me demandais, vous, comment est-ce que vous comptez voter? Est-ce que ce sera un vote libre dans votre caucus?
Je vais voter pour la motion parce que je vais toujours respecter les chambres des compétences des provinces. C'est important, particulièrement après 6 ans de M. Trudeau, et on a une crise d'unité maintenant, particulièrement dans l'Ouest. Et je suis fier de notre parti. C'était un gouvernement conservateur qui a reconnu la nation québécoise en 2006, et on va parler sur ça demain dans le débat.
Nous allons prendre la prochaine question de la salle. We'll take the next question from the floor.
Boris Proulx du Devoir. Dans le même ordre d'idées, M. O'Toole, on a appris ce matin que dans la réforme de la loi sur les langues officielles, on va inscrire que le Québec a comme langue officielle le français. J'aimerais savoir si vous êtes en accord avec ce que vous avez lu jusqu'à maintenant de cette proposition de projet de loi.
Après 6 ans d'inaction par le gouvernement de M. Trudeau sur les lois sur les langues officielles, seulement des gestes juste avant la pause. Moi, il y a 8 mois, j'ai dit que la langue française est une force pour notre pays. J'appuie l'application de loi 101 aux entreprises à charte fédérale. Je vais moderniser les lois sur les langues officielles dans mes premiers 100 jours comme un premier ministre. C'était seulement après notre intervention sur la langue, le déclin à Montréal, que le gouvernement de M. Trudeau a proposé quelques mesures, mais c'est une priorité pour moi et pour notre caucus. Ce n'est pas une priorité pour M. Trudeau ou Mme Joly.
Donc, Québec, comme seule langue officielle le français, vous n'avez pas spécifiquement répondu là-dessus, mais j'aimerais enchaîner. Vous avez commencé votre point de presse en parlant des juges et de la libéraliste. Il y a peu de juges à la Cour fédérale qui sont issus de la diversité, donc francophones, autochtones, peu de femmes également. On sait qu'on doit pourvoir aussi un poste de juge à la Cour suprême. Est-ce que l'argument de diversité serait une considération pour votre gouvernement?
Oui, absolument. J'aimerais voir des points de vue sur nos nominations judiciaires. Et pour la Cour suprême, je vais nominer les juges basés sur deux principes. Premièrement, le mérite et deuxièmement, un engagement pour le français, d'apprendre ou d'améliorer leur français. C'est une priorité pour moi. Mais c'est important aussi de trouver des points de vue pour notre pays moderne. Les Autochtones, plus de femmes, plus de minorités. Ça serait une priorité pour moi comme Premier ministre, comme un avocat et comme un Canadien.
Operator, next question. Opérateur, prochaine question.
Christian Noël, Radio-Canada.
Bonjour, M. O'Toole. Écoutez, pour faire suite à ça, si je comprends bien, vous, avoir un juge qui doit absolument être bilingue pour siéger à la Cour suprême, ça ne serait pas un critère. Cette personne-là pourrait apprendre le français ou l'améliorer plus tard. Ma question est la suivante. Pourquoi est-ce que vous croyez que pour siéger à la plus haute cour du pays, on n'est pas obligé d'être bilingue?
Un engagement pour le français est une priorité. Et c'était comme Mme McLaughlin, M. Roux, c'est possible pour un juge d'améliorer leur français et c'est un principe important pour les juges d'être bilingues avant ou en même temps de la nomination.
Pour changer de sujet, j'aimerais revenir avec vous sur la partie de golf. Vous avez dit que c'était inacceptable et vous blâmez surtout le gouvernement Trudeau, mais j'aimerais vous entendre parler, pas juste du gouvernement Trudeau et du ministre Sajjan, mais du leadership lui-même. Pourquoi c'est acceptable d'avoir cette partie de golf-là avec le général Vance et quel message vous croyez que ça envoie aux personnes et aux victimes?
C'était totalement inacceptable pour les officiers généraux d'avoir un événement avec un autre ancien chef d'état-major sous enquête maintenant. C'est totalement inacceptable. C'est un autre exemple d'une institution totalement déconnectée par la réalité. Et on doit rétablir la confiance des Canadiens et Canadiennes dans nos institutions, nos forces armées canadiennes et le bureau du Premier ministre. Après 3 scandales, après beaucoup de camouflage avec l'harcèlement dans les forces armées canadiennes, les Canadiens, les Québécoises méritent mieux et on va avoir une approche plus éthique comme un gouvernement est prêt pour gouverner.
Operator, last question. Opérateur, dernière question.
Mary Kay Walsh, Globe and Mail.
Good morning, Mr. O'Toole. I'm hoping you can comment on the government's release of the redacted versions of the contracts with the vaccine companies. Is this sufficient for the Conservatives? It's kind of the last thing that's been missing from the document disclosure. I believe that was requested from the House of Commons.
Thank you, Mary Kay. If you notice, the order that was requested last fall has only come out in dribs and drabs. And some of the documents, which the government tried desperately to cover up and to not release or to redact majorly, are only coming now that we're getting vaccination rates up to an acceptable level and we see some light at the end of the tunnel. The Trudeau government, at every step of this pandemic, has either tried to limit scrutiny, limit debate, limit coverage, cover up any questions, whether it's the We Charity scandal, whether it was the CanSino vaccine partnership failure, and then why we were so late compared to the US and other countries on the supply of vaccines. So I think Canadians should see it was reluctance to be transparent with Canadians and why we're getting these contracts days before Parliament finishes for the session. This is a government, whether it's the appointment of judges, whether it's the We Charity scandal, they're the least transparent government in Canadian history. There's an entitlement problem starting at the top with Mr. Trudeau, and Canadians deserve better.
And so what does that mean about what your party will be doing in the House? Are you going to challenge this, or given that there is sensitive information, will you accept it as is?
Well, we know that Canada paid more and received vaccines slower than any other country in the G7. That is likely due to Mr. Trudeau's attempted partnership with a Chinese state company and because of the Trudeau government's pushing out the innovative medicines industry in Canada. In our Canada Recovery Plan, the fourth pillar to secure our country's future, we're going to build domestic vaccine capacity, critical PPE and other critical medicine capacity, a national stockpile system. We will re-establish the pandemic early warning system. All of the things that were dropped by the Trudeau government early in this crisis, we will try and restore. We're still going to push for rapid screening and testing, a national process for that, because Mr. Trudeau promised that a year ago. We still don't have that, and we're going to need that for a swift and secure reopening.
C'est tout le temps que nous avions. This is all the time we have. Merci.
Thank you very much.